On July 29th, 2024, a devastating act of violence shook Southport, Merseyside. A planned and horrific attack at a Taylor Swift-themed dance class left 3 young girls dead and 10 others injured. The perpetrator, 18-year-old Axel Rudukbana, carried out a premeditated mass stabbing, leaving a lasting impact on families, the community, and the country as a whole. In this deep dive, we will explore the events of that tragic day, the background of the attacker, the systematic failures that may have led to this happening, the legal proceedings that followed, and the broader implications for justice and public safety. What lessons can we learn, and what changes must be made to prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again? It was supposed to be a morning of fun and joy, a simple dance class where young children could celebrate their love for Taylor Swift's music. The venue, a small community centre, was filled with excited children, unaware that their lives were about to change forever. Shortly before 11:45, Axel Rudukbana arrived at Hart Street by taxi, which he had booked under the false name of Simon. He asked the driver to direct him to 34A Hart Street, and then left the vehicle without paying the fare and began walking down the alley towards the Hart space. The workshop was organised by yoga teacher Leanne Lucas and Heidi Liddell. Lucas announced the class in her Instagram post on July 7th. It was advertised as a yoga, dance and bracelet making workshop themed around the music of Taylor Swift. The workshop was aimed at children ages 6 to 11 and was being held in the first week of the summer holidays, scheduled for July 29th between 10 a.m. and 12. The event was sold out days later, with 26 children booked into the workshop. Wearing a surgical mask and a green hoodie and armed with an 8-inch kitchen knife, Axel entered the building at 11:45 through a front door which was unlocked for fire safety reasons, and walked up the flight of stairs towards the studio. Organiser Leanne did not initially realise that Axel was armed and thought he was there to collect a child. Axel began stabbing children at random, moving quickly throughout the room while remaining silent. Leanne realised he was attacking the children only when he moved towards her and stabbed her in the back 5 times. Leanne and Heidi tried their best to shield the children from Axel. Leanne ushered some children out of the venue via a fire exit, and Heidi hid a child in a bathroom. Leanne called 999 and sent others down the main stairs to the car park, telling them to run away once outside. One girl was pulled back inside the building and stabbed by Axel while attempting to leave. She collapsed outside but survived. Merseyside police received the first emergency call at 11:47 and emergency services were dispatched. Northwest Ambulance Service received their first call a minute later. Jonathan Hayes, who was working in an office in the same building, ran into the studio after hearing screams and encountered Axel on the landing, crouching over the body of a child. Jonathan retreated, but Axel followed him into his office and swiped at him. Jonathan attempted to disarm Axel, but was stabbed in the leg and fell to the ground. Members of the public helped those who had escaped the building. Marcin Tyjon and Joel Verti were on the Hart Street when they encountered a group of children, as well as Leanne Lucas, who was covered in blood and screaming that someone was inside stabbing children. Marcin administered CPR to Alice da Silva Aguera, while Joel ran into the building and saw Axel holding a knife. The first police officer arrived on the scene at 11:57. After backup arrived, an officer with a taser entered the studio with Joel. They encountered Axel standing over BB King's body, still holding the knife. After being ordered to drop the knife, Axel cooperated and was arrested by 2 police officers, while Joel carried the child's body outside. Emergency services quickly declared a major incident as armed response vehicles, 13 ambulances, the fire service and 3 air ambulances arrived. Merseyside police imposed an emergency restriction around the area, stopping aircraft, including helicopters and drones, from flying without permission. An anonymous witness at the scene said it was absolute chaos, the kind of thing you think only happens in movies. People were screaming, children were crying. It was like time had stopped and we were trapped in a nightmare. So who was Axel Rudukbana, and what led him to commit such an unspeakable act of violence? When Axel Rudukbana returned to school after the summer holidays 5 years ago, something had changed. He had turned 13 weeks earlier, but this was not the usual difficult transition into teenage life. In years 7 and 8 at school, he was fairly unassuming. Nothing about him would have caused any red flags. But what happened in that summer is the real question. Within a month of the new term, he complained of being racially bullied. Fellow pupils said he started acting up in class, remonstrating with teachers and sometimes storming out, doing an Axel, as it became known. In October 2019, the 13-year-old made an anonymous phone call to Childline admitting to having murderous thoughts about a bully. He said that he had taken a kitchen knife to school on 10 occasions and asked, "What should I do if I wanted to kill somebody?" The disturbing call was a plea for help, his barrister said. It triggered a chain of events that would culminate nearly 5 years later in one of the most shocking atrocities in the recent UK history. It is a story that can be told in full for the first time after Rudukbana, now 18, was sentenced to a minimum of 52 years in prison, the longest for anyone of his age. Within days of his call to Childline, Rudukbana was permanently expelled from Range High School and mainstream education altogether. Records show that he never really settled into any other school, bouncing from pupil referral unit to 2 specialist providers, his obsession with violence growing all the time. In his admission interview at Acorn's pupil referral unit in Ormskirk on the 17th of October 2019, he was asked why he'd taken a knife to his former school, and his reply was, "to use it." It was an example of the almost childlike honesty with which he spoke to professionals, including the police, who had become involved 10 days earlier when he admitted to taking knives into school. The 13-year-old, who lived with his parents and older brother in the quiet Lancashire village of Banks, was referred by the police to local safeguarding board, which began the process of offering behaviour and emotional well-being support. 2 months later, just before pupils broke up for Christmas, he returned to Range High School armed with a hockey stick and attacked another pupil, breaking their wrist. He had to be restrained by staff. The head teacher said Rudukbana had no sense of the wrongness of his actions. Police later found a knife in his backpack and arrested him on suspicion of assault and carrying a bladed article. He pleaded guilty, earning himself a criminal record at the age of 13, and undertook a rehabilitation program centred on knife crime and offending behaviour, which he completed in 2021. Classmates had known for months about Rudukbana's fascination with gruesome videos online, and now he had come to the attention of professionals. During an IT class at the Acorn, he made alarming comments about mass shootings. A teacher looked over his shoulder to see a web page about a bloodbath at a US high school and reported it to Prevent, the government's anti-radicalisation program. He was interviewed by a counter-terrorism officer, but he was not escalated as a concern because he had no firm ideology. As the COVID-19 pandemic forced the country into lockdown in March 2020, Rudukbana sank deeper into the shadows. He had come under the care of Alder Hey Children's Hospital Mental Health Service, which said his anxiety was preventing him from leaving the home. Neighbours barely saw him, describing him as a virtual recluse. Spending days at home online, he downloaded a version of the Al-Qaeda training manual 3 times in 2021, later using it to make the deadly poison ricin in his bedroom. In February 2021, a former pupil reported Rudukbana to Prevent because of posts he had shared on Instagram about the late Libyan dictator Gaddafi. This time, he was not seen in person by counter-terrorism officers, and his case, again, was closed. 2 months later, he was on Prevent's radar for a 3rd time when a teacher at the Acorn noticed he was researching the 2017 London Bridge attack again. He was not visited in person, and there was no further action taken. In the 6 months from November 2021, officers from the Lancashire Constabulary were called to Rudukbana's house on 4 occasions as his behaviour became more erratic. On one occasion, his mother had reported him missing and he was found by police on a bus with a knife, refusing to pay his fare. Rudukbana told officers he wanted to stab someone so that the police would seize his phone and delete embarrassing videos which were on social media accounts that he could no longer access. He was fixated on removing the videos, his barrister said, and he did not appear to understand the consequences such actions would have. Instead of arresting him, which would have been his second offence for a knife crime. They took him home and told his mother to just keep his knives out of his reach. Weeks later, they were back at Rudukbana's home after he erupted when his father banned him from using the laptop. His parents asked officers for help to cope with him. The police referred him each time to the local safeguarding teams, but his engagement with them was slipping. In his bedroom, he was making plans for an attack. He had purchased castor beans, funnels, flasks, and safety goggles on Amazon, getting them delivered to an unsuspecting neighbour. Police believe he was using the Al-Qaeda manual to learn how to kill using a knife. Police sources suggested that one likely area to be identified as a failure by the public inquiry into the Southport attack was the apparent lack of dialogue between Prevent and the local police forces. It's understood that frontline officers were not able to see Rudukbana's Prevent history because that data is kept on a separate system, only available to counter-terrorism officials. Rudukbana had stopped engaging with all mental health support by February 2023. He had not been to school for almost a year and was spending more and more time at home on his tablet, spiralling down horrifying rabbit holes. He never hid his dark obsessions. Professionals who visited him at his home said that the Rwanda genocide, a mass killing in which both of his parents were caught up, was all he wanted to talk about. They had started to insist on a police officer being present at their meetings. People were clearly worried about him, but he either was never taken seriously or no one really quite knew what to do with him. By the summer of 2024, nearly 5 years after his call to Childline, Rudukbana's descent from well-disciplined schoolboy to one of Britain's most notorious killers was complete. He will now probably spend the rest of his life in prison. The trial of Axel Rudukbana was one of the most closely watched cases in recent UK history. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of premeditation and brutality. Rudukbana's lack of remorse shocked even the most seasoned of legal professionals. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 52 years. Given the extreme nature of his crime, many questioned why he did not receive a whole life order. A legal expert said, "The law currently prevents offenders from under 18 receiving whole life orders. The case has led to serious discussions about whether the law should be amended for such cases of extreme violence." In response, the Attorney General Lord Harmer said, "The senseless and barbaric murder of these 3 young girls in Southport last summer shocked our nation. No words come anywhere close to expressing the brutality and horror in this case. It was understandable that we received multiple requests to review the sentence under the unduly lenient sentence scheme, which is designed to identify and remedy gross errors made by judges. After careful consideration of the independent legal service and consultation with the leading criminal barristers and the Crown Prosecution Service, I have concluded that this case cannot be properly referred to the Court of Appeal. No one would want the families to be put through an unnecessary further court process where there is no realistic legal bias for an increased sentence. The 52-year sentence imposed by the judges was the second longest sentence imposed by the courts in English history. Rudukbana will likely never be released and will spend the rest of his life in jail. The government have set out the next steps that must now take place to ensure that these awful murders will be a line in the sand. My thoughts today are with the friends, families of Bibi, Elsie and Alice, as well as the other victims. Your memories will never be forgotten." In court, victims were able to give statements about the impact of that day on their lives. Rudukbana, like a coward, kicked off and made statements about how he was unwell and did everything he could to disrupt the process, and ended up being taken out of the court because even though he was man enough to do these crimes, he wasn't man enough to face the situation. And what you see with a lot of people like this is that they try and define the narrative, so they try and control the situation by making demands. And he was after a while he was taken out. One of the statements was from a 14-year-old girl who had been at the event. She had the bravery to address the court while Axel was sat outside. Here's the words that she said. She said, "The thing I remember about you most is your eyes. You looked possessed, and you didn't look human. You stabbed me in the arm, and I instinctively turned around. That's when you continued to stab me in the back. All I could hear was screams. I ran out onto the landing, and there was a group of girls huddled. I began just screaming for the girls to get down the stairs. I was physically pushing them down the stairs to get them out of the building and get them away from you. I knew I was running for my life. I remember thinking, I need to get away from you, as you weren't going to stop. I knew from your eyes that you wanted to try and kill us all. Can you imagine having to go through that? I know this is fairly difficult reading and fairly difficult listening, but can you imagine at 14 what you were doing? I know everyone has a tough life and difficult things they have to go through, but can you imagine having to deal with this and having this as your memories? Heidi Liddell was teaching the class, and she and one of the girls ran into the toilet and managed to hide from what was happening on the other side of the door. She described in court the torment of surviving that day. She said she replayed the incident over and over in her mind, changing the sequence of events so that herself and the little girl that she was with in the toilet were stabbed and killed. She started to think that maybe she should feel the pain of what it was like to be stabbed, as she struggled mentally with not being physically injured and the guilt that she felt for this. The dance instructor, Leanne Lucas, who put on the event because she wanted to make a positive impact, told the court that she'd lost her purpose in life. She was stabbed 5 times and has multiple surgeries. The impact that she said, and this can be summed up by one word: trauma. Axel targeted us because we were women and girls and vulnerable, easy prey. It's very difficult for people to deal sometimes with the survivor's guilt of what they did and how they acted and what they could have done differently. I mean, every one of those people in there were trying to do something good and ended up having to become heroes fighting for their lives. So not 1 second can you even blame anyone for hiding or running. It's very difficult to even talk about because it's so devastating thinking that these innocent people had to be put into a position where they had to become heroes and were tested in that way. It's devastating to think that these people now struggle to walk down the streets because they feel like they're going to get attacked again. My heart goes out to them, and I really struggle to kind of put together any kind of sense of what was going on. In prison, you do kind of meet people who you feel like are just plain evil. And again, it's only circumstances that have led to them going one way or the other. It seems like Axel started off as not a bad kid, but as he went through teenage life, just became more and more entrenched in his views in violence and debauchery, and ended up possibly. I mean, can we also sort of have a look at maybe the lockdown and that mental effect that it had on everyone? And it was possibly those hours and hours of time sat online, being able to research violence and just feeding his brain with bad stuff. I don't know if we're ever going to be able to control the online world to an extent where all of that is gotten rid of. You know, television is set up in a way that you can't see anything adult before 9 o'clock at night. But the internet, you can go and look at the most horrific stuff. Even on Instagram, you can see murders and shooting and killings all day, any time of day. Or, you know, if the algorithm pushes naked girls at you all day, it's, you know, it can warp your brain just by whatever you suddenly start to click on. Now, talking about the internet, after the Southport killings, obviously lots of rumours started flying around. I started seeing them myself being shared online about who Axel was. You know, it started off by people saying that he was an immigrant and he was a Muslim, and this was all, you know, a race and terrorism related offence. And because there was a lack of information being given between the police and the communities, that just spread like wildfire. And then in the days and weeks after the event and the stabbings, we saw people taking to the streets and kicking off. There were riots. There were, and I believe quite justly, there was a lot of anger felt across communities that people's voices weren't being listened to, the concerns of the communities that dangerous people are being put into our communities, and we have no control over it. And if you try and mention anything about it, then you're deemed as racist. And yet again and again, we're seeing crimes committed by people who shouldn't be in our country, and the lack of communication between the police, the government, and groups leading to vulnerable people being injured, killed, raped, murdered all the time. Now, in this instance, it turned out to be not true. Even though his parents were immigrants, there was no case of radicalization, or no background of being Muslim or any other religion that may cause hate, or reason, or group that may cause hate. The problem we have is that with online, it is the Wild West, and a lot of misinformation is pushed to cause anger and hate and stir the pot, essentially, through these riots and things. So, yeah, in this instance, it didn't turn out to be true, but in so many other instances, that's what it was. The straw that broke the camel's back with a lot of people. Now, I live down in the southwest, and very little happens down here in the way of protests and riots. But we even saw in Plymouth people coming out and rioting, and the anger that was felt then. I even saw it on the news that they were saying they were far right protests, and I don't think that that's a very good way of describing normal everyday people going out and protesting. You know, there was little old ladies in the crowd. Now, I know obviously there was a far right contingent to it, and then there would have been all of the other grades of just anger, just normal people going out and being upset and angry that this was happening again, and the brutality and the innocence just pushed normal people to go out and kick off and fight and argue. And you know, some people obviously threw stuff at the police. Some people attacked hotels where immigrants were staying. All of the time when these things happen, if we go back and look at the attack on the concert with Ariana Grande, and I believe he was a Libyan immigrant who did that. And again, all of the warning signs were there. He was on the terrorism watchdog watch lists and things. It was very difficult to justify why this guy hadn't been put away or sent somewhere. You know, I don't know what we're supposed to do to keep our country safe, but it just seems like, again, this was a mixed web of everything that's wrong and all the perfect ingredients for a horrific event to take place, and nothing was done to stop it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I know it's been a little bit long coming out, but obviously there's still so much going on, and I wanted to get a full view of the story before putting anything out. But yeah, hit me up in the comments. Come to Instagram, WilliamBonney838, and let me know what you're feeling. It was a difficult one to read and research and edit together, but it's one of the most talked about things at the moment. So yeah, thank you very much for getting all this way through. It was a very difficult one to listen to and to read out, obviously. Thank you very much, and we'll make another video again soon. Bye bye now.